we will have Hugh. He's going to bring us through how to get to product market fit. Hugh is our regular mentor in residence. In case you don't know him, you can also find him in our mentor portal and our Block71 OS. So after the session, unfortunately he's going to rush off. So you can still reach out to him via that portal.
Sure. Thank you. There is one video with sound in it, so I don't know whether that will come through, but thank you very much. So, hi everybody, it's great to see you. I have to start with an apology. I did something really stupid the other night. In the middle of the night, I got up and I managed to kind of kick a table or something. And I don't know what I've done to my foot, but it's like a week on and my foot is still not right. So normally I like to bounce around when I'm talking to try and make it dynamic. And today it's going to be rather static as I sit here on this stool. So apologies for that. It's not that I don't care. It's not that I'm not enthusiastic about seeing you. It's just I stubbed my toe. Okay, so product market fit. What a fantastic presentation you just heard. That is a vision of where you should be aiming to be in 5 years' time. Okay, a wonderful, consistent sales process. Nobody does it better than Microsoft. That's why they're so successful, have been around for decades, right? The challenge is, how do you get to that very first column? Do you remember David had that diagram and it said identify pain point, right? That's the hard bit, right? That's what product market fit is all about. So I've got a bit of a challenge with this presentation. I've got 1 hour with you here. You've all got different businesses. You've all got different levels of experience. And you've all got something to address in this session, which is the most murky, frustrating, balls-achingly painful part of running a startup, all right? Sorry, I can't put it any other way, right? I don't know if I can't remember who it was that said running a startup is like eating glass every day. Was it Musk? I hate to quote Musk. Okay, I take that quote away. Not my favorite person at the moment. Okay, so product market fit is extremely hard. So why do we talk about it? Because it's important. Before I pitch into that, thank you very much to everybody who gave feedback on the previous session I ran with you a month ago. So I only have tiny insights into where you're at on your journey. Some of faces I recognize. Hello again, lovely to see you. Some of you very kindly gave me feedback about the things that you remember. That's helpful to me. Please give me feedback today, because I must admit, as I found, there is so much to cover today that I found this the hardest presentation I've actually given this year, I think, so far. Most people were happy with the kind of pace of last time. One person wanted me to go faster. What I'm actually going to do today is to try and go quite fast through the material to leave a long time for questions at the end. The reason being that doing this stuff, doing product market fit, will be different from every one of you, right? There isn't a process for this. The wonderful thing about working in Microsoft is there is a process. There are resources you can download, right? There are clients who know who the hell you are and will let you through the door. Your clients don't know that you exist. And if they do know you exist, they don't care. And if they do care about you, they don't know how to make their bosses trust you yet, right? So product market fit is about overcoming all those kinds of challenges. So thank you very much. Everyone who gave me feedback. If you something that's not making sense, please interrupt me. But please bear in mind, I'm going to try and leave Q&A at the end. Okay, so I don't know if anyone's come across this. There's a wonderful company called CB Insights, which gathers a lot of data on the startup market. And they've put together, and they keep revising, a list of why do startups fail. And I just picked the top 3 reasons from their latest list, and they usually don't change. Number 2, no market need. People launch businesses where people didn't want the product. Duh. Well, as David, our previous speaker, said, sometimes that's not easy to tell. It wasn't clear when the iPhone was launched that it was something the market wanted. I don't know if you know, Steve Jobs tried 10 years earlier with the Apple Newton. Google or look on YouTube for the Apple Newton advertisement. It's really weird to see now, because it's a prediction from sort of 1997 of what we now think of as an obvious thing, a smartphone. But in 1997, the technology wasn't right and it didn't fit people's lives. So outside this session, do go and have a look at the Apple Newton. It is really hard to launch products that people actually want. The dirty secret is that the world's largest corporations, 70% of their time, research has shown, their product launches don't work. They don't shout about it. They don't like stakeholders hearing about it because it's embarrassing. But the truth is 70% of the time, even with the kinds of resources that Microsoft's got, it doesn't work. It's really, really hard. So I say that not to put you off, just to say, please don't beat yourself up. If you're finding the next couple of years running your startup extremely hard, that's because it is. It just is. So what can we do today? I wanted to talk, to sort of step back, and I think in 1 hour, what I can try and do is give you some kind of an overview of the landscape of how I've seen. I've probably mentored about 1,500, 1,800 startups over the last 20 years. So I've seen many different people take different kind of pathways through all of this. And what I'm going to try and share with you is a kind of a landscape. And along the way, I'm going to try and drop in some things that you might want to look in for yourself. So we are not going to come away from today with this like 10 instant rollout, surefire, do ABC and you will succeed. I can't give you that. I wish I could. I'd be a billionaire if I could do that, right? In fact, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. I'd be doing it myself. But what I can do is give you a landscape, and I can kind of tell you where some of this stuff is emerging. And if you want a sort of historical context on why it's complicated, you know, before the year sort of 1900, business was a pretty random thing. It was basically run by tycoons. During the early 20th century, we started getting consistent, or the end of the 19th century, we got consistent accounting practices. People began to understand organizational behavior, things like that, right? So most of the stuff that you'd learn on an MBA now kind of relates to very early 20th century businesses. Right? And by the time we got to the 1950s, especially after the Second World War was won by a combination of big industry and government. So everything was about systemization, grand schemes, the kind of thing that you've heard that works at Microsoft so successfully. And many people would have told you in the 1960s, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you must be a loser. You can't make it with a proper job. I think 20, 30 years ago, that would have been the attitude of most people here in Singapore. Most parents would not have been keen to know that their son or daughter wanted to be an entrepreneur. What's happened is that we started to realize actually, first of all, every large company starts small, right? Secondly, we haven't yet developed the same kind of wealth of understanding of how to get startups from the very beginning to the stage where they have product market fit. We haven't done that. Most of the energy and most of the resource that's gone into understanding business has gone into understanding later stage businesses, mature startups, which are now large companies. So that's what you learn if you go on an MBA. I'm not knocking it. It's all right. Everything you learn on MBA is correct. It applies to a later stage of company. So everything you've just heard, the general principles of what you just heard in that excellent presentation I caught the end of, are apply to your business. That's how a corporate will expect you to behave. They want you to be a Microsoft, okay? But you're not, and you can't be. So the question is, how do you get there? So let's look at product and market. This phrase product market fit is massively misunderstood, and there are loads of really confusing things about it online. I'm not claiming to have any great Nobel Prize winning insight here, but I'm going to try and show you my pragmatic view of what it is by going back to look at what we mean by products and markets. So I live in Red Hill, that's my market. On the right-hand side is not Red Hill market, that's a market somewhere in Europe. But I think, you know, historically, again, the words we use to describe businesses, we talk about products. Probably half the companies in this room don't produce a product, you probably produce a service. So even the language that we use about business is often outdated. And the mental picture we have of a marketplace, you need to kind of probe that a bit to think, well, how helpful is this to me or not? So what is it about a market? Well, it's a place that's clearly defined where you know you can come. And it's a place where typically, traditionally, everyone understands what's on sale. So the reason markets started existing is because farmers were growing food typically, and they might grow cabbages, but of course people want to eat more than cabbages. So if all the farmers with cabbages come to one place and all the people with olives and all the people with avocados come together, then in one place you can buy everything that a family needs. So it's an aggregation of supply and an aggregation of demand. That's what a market is, right? And for something like vegetables, that's great because you can know what you're buying. You can pick it up, you can squeeze it, you can, look at it. But markets aren't all like that. If you go to a second-hand car market, you can see superficially what cars are on sale, but they don't always have a price on them. Some have a price on the front, but not all of them. And you certainly don't know actually what you're buying. There is enormous information asymmetry when you buy a used car. The person selling it to you knows what they're selling, more or less, but you don't know until you bought it. And there's a wonderful paper called A Market for Lemons, if you ever want to Google that. It's about the whole dynamics of the used car market and many markets in the world where there is massive information asymmetry. Other markets, like the stock exchange, you can't see what you're buying and selling, but you can absolutely see the price of it in real time. Right? There are some markets where it's fairly obvious who's competing with who. You go down a street of fast food restaurants and it's fairly obvious you have a choice and you kind of know that you're going to get more or less the same thing, different flavors in different places. And the pricing is fairly obvious, right? It's all up there. But if you go and try and buy a handphone, telecom service, right? It's almost impossible, I find, to try and work out, am I getting a good deal with my cell phone supplier or not? They deliberately make it as obscure as possible so that you don't know what you're buying. And at the end of the day, you think, oh, I hate Singtel, but you know what, I'll buy them, okay. Again, I'll buy Singtel because it's Singtel, right? Or whatever. I don't want to knock Singtel. So some markets are very obscure, deliberately so, and that suits the people who are in the market. There are some markets where you can just start up and start selling. For example, but there are others where it's very closed. So in most of Europe and some parts of Asia, you can't sell hearing aids, for example. You or I could not start up a hearing aid startup in most of Europe. Hearing aids have to be supplied in most of Europe by a licensed audiologist. Now, my wife has hearing loss, so I know something about this, and I've worked with a hearing aid company. The truth is, as a CEO of a large hearing aid company here in Singapore said to me once, this is a criminal enterprise. Does anyone here know how much a single hearing aid costs? Yes. Shout. Sorry? 1,000? Yes. You can pay between $3,000 and $6,000 for each ear. Right? The electronics in there is about $5 worth, $10 worth. Right? And the reason why it is a gilded cage, there are a number of licensed hearing aid manufacturers, none of whom wants to go into a price war because they've all spent years building a massive barrier to competition to people like you who know that this can happen, right? And the reason you can't just set up a hearing aid company in Europe is because you have to go through a whole regulatory process, blah, 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 which maybe made sense in the past. Nowadays, to be honest, most of the time, an audiologist just sticks the hearing aid in your ear, presses the configure button, and it does it all automatically, all right? In my humble opinion, you don't need to be a licensed audiologist to dispense them. It used to be the same for glasses in the UK, reading glasses. You used to have to go to a licensed eye specialist. Now you can buy glasses on the unregulated market. So some markets are extremely regulated. Other markets, like, for example, in order to be able to sell investments in Singapore, above a certain level, you have to be an accredited investor. I don't know if you come across that concept. Something you should understand, because as you're pitching for money for your startups, you cannot in Singapore put out an advert that says, hey, I'm looking for money for my startup, right? That's soliciting, that's an initial public offering, right? You cannot do that. Monetary Authority of Singapore will come and jail you if you do that, all right? You cannot do that. You can only disclose details of a potential speculative investment to accredited investors, right? So be very careful about that in this market. If you try and sell to the oil and gas industry, they're extremely conservative. They're not going to buy from a startup. They're interested to know what startups are doing. But if I've got a $1 billion investment in an oil refinery and it's going to be there for 30 years, am I going to put some startup technology in it? No. I'm going to put something in it that's 20 years tried and tested. On the other hand, exact opposite, other markets are incredibly speculative. And the whole point is about taking massive, crazy risks, because it isn't really about the products, it's all about the speculation. I like working with the maritime sector. One of the privileges of working at NUS Enterprise is I get to work on this program called Pier 71, where we work with maritime companies. And the thing I like about the maritime sector is it's thousands of years old. Has anyone been to the Asian Civilizations Museum here? You know, if you recognize this exhibit, I remember seeing this and thinking, this is a ship that sunk in 700 AD or something. And the stuff on it looks like you could kind of buy it in IKEA today, you know? It's basically kind of tableware, and they've kind of got a set exactly like you'd buy today. And I thought, isn't that interesting? So people were making pottery in one place, and they were shipping it across Asia at that time, 700 years ago. So they had all the same issues that people have in shipping now. If I order this from someone in China, will the correct stuff arrive? Will it be the right quantity? Will it be broken when it arrives? It's just like ordering on Taobao or AliExpress, right? Same issues applied. So the maritime sector has got lots and lots of processes involved. It's very mature. Everyone kind of knows where they are. Everyone has their patch. You can argue that makes it inflexible, but you can also say it has some advantages because, for example, the programs that we run for innovation in maritime here are all about raising all boats. As I say, a rising tide lifts all boats. We try and find problems to solve across the maritime sector where everyone benefits, a win-win for everyone. And then if no one's saying no to it, then people will say yes. So the strategy you use to approach a mature market might be very different to one that you approach an emerging market. Is everyone aware of the Gartner hype cycle? Can I have a show of hands for anyone who's seen it? So Gartner is a market research firm, and cycle is a bit of an odd word because it isn't really a cycle, and it's only a theory. They have this theory that things come into the marketplace, often because of new technology, sometimes because of new business models. They get massively overhyped for a while, and then people get disappointed in them, and then they turn out to be there in our lives, but they're kind of not game-changing. So I'm at 58 now. I've lived through several kind of major technological revolutions. So I'm a bit cynical about AI, for example, right? The kind of language we're hearing about AI sounds remarkably like what I heard about the internet back in 1995, 1994, 1993. Back then, the internet was going to bring world peace, or it was going to expose all our children to pedophilia and we'd all have all our bank accounts raped, right? It was extremes. Either it's utopia or dystopia. And actually, what is the internet? It's a thing for sending cat pictures to your sister. Okay. I'm joking. What the point I'm making is that technology always turns out to be more banal than we imagine. What seems game-changing today is just meh tomorrow. And eventually, of course, we move on from it completely. So if I give you an example of where that's happened, in the 1980s, fax machines were very rare. I remember my dad telling me his office had just got this thing where you could send a document instantly to another place, and that was amazing. And I went to visit his office aged 11. I saw this thing very slowly sending a single page, right? But they didn't take off until the postal workers in Britain decided to go on strike, and then suddenly everyone bought fax machines. And then in the late 1980s, early 1990s, we all had them at home. I think at one time my wife and I had 2 fax lines at home because we were both working in different ways. And now fax, of course, is completely redundant. So technologies go through this thing and eventually they drop off the end of that curve. So isn't this interesting? This was the curve for August 2024, and Gartner was already saying generative AI on the way down. The only people talking about generative AI now and thinking that it's going to change the world is your dad, who used to invest in, solid boring shares and now thinks AI is the next big thing. And that's how the stock market works. There's a bunch of people who are kind of 6 months behind the curve. They're the schmucks that buy the stuff that's gone off the boil, while the smart investors are already on to the next thing to sell it to a greater fool up here. And that's what happened with the dot-com boom. So some markets are just emerging. Now, before I pitch on to my next slide, can I just go around the room? Can you shout out in 1 or 2 words, which market are you in? Okay, which market are you in? Sorry? Automotive. Medtech, okay? AI, okay? Medtech. Fintech. AI, okay. So how big do you think the AI market is? It's a freaking ocean, isn't it, right? If you say you're in the AI market, you're trying to, healthcare AI, you're trying to boil the ocean, right? You will not succeed. So the first thing you need to know about product market fit is you need to know specifically which market are you in, right? Because you ain't got no money. You can't be Microsoft. You can't spend 5 years kind of popularizing an interesting new technology and getting everyone used to a new way of working. You don't have that luxury. Microsoft does, you don't. And then the nice thing about maritime is because it's very visible, you can see where you can find a niche. And I'll come back to that. So you're absolutely right. And I do recommend maritime. There's an excellent program called Pier 71. We can tell you all about it. Okay, so whatever market you're in, has anyone ever seen this picture before? Is this familiar to anyone, this picture? This is sometimes called the innovation trifecta. Apparently this shape is called a trifecta. I always thought it was a Venn diagram, but there you go. So what this basically says is that if you want something to succeed, including a business, it has to do these 3 things at the same time. And it turns out to be extremely difficult to get to that bit in the middle. Right? So obviously, whatever systems or technologies you use, it's got to work, right? For example, I sometimes say stupid things to my wife. It would be fantastic to rewind time by about 10 seconds. That's extremely desirable, and I would pay a lot of money for it, but it's science fiction, right? So this place over here is science fiction. It's not feasible. Things have got to be value generating. They've actually got to create value for people, and they've got to capture value for you. Otherwise, you go out of business. So I could stand on Orchard Road and give out $100 bills. That would be extremely desirable for the people walking past. And it's definitely feasible. But of course, I'd run out of money. So this is charity. Science fiction, charity. So what's this gap here? This gap here is what I call self-delusion land, right? This is where I've got some kind of solution which I think is brilliant. And when I do all the calculations and draw out my spreadsheets, it just looks brilliant. Right? I'm going to make loads of money. It's just that the world doesn't care. It's not usually that the world hates you. It's usually that the world doesn't care. Right? So in order for a business to be successful, it's got to do all those 3 things at once. Now, today, we're not going to talk about anything to do with technology. What I want to do is to kind of give you a sort of pragmatic overview about how I've seen companies try to address these 2 things in parallel. And as I say, it turns out to be extremely difficult to do this. In fact, to be perfectly honest, this is the essence of the startup journey. Designing a sales strategy is fantastic, but you've got to have something to sell that people want. Otherwise, you can go blue in the face drawing fantastic diagrams, and they will work if you've got something that people want. But how do you know what people will actually want and buy, and how do you get to those customers, right? So that's what this is about. Now let's talk about when product market fit happens, because it's very, very common for me as a mentor to meet startups, and they'll say, oh yeah, we've got product market fit. We've already got like 1 contract. We don't know why we won it. It was a crappy price, but hey, you know, we have a customer. That's not product market fit. So when does product market fit happen? If you were in my last session, you might remember this picture of a startup journey. Startups begin with conversations between an entrepreneurial team, stakeholders like customers and investors and business partners, and advisors and researchers and regulators and people like that. Out of that comes some beginning of an idea for a business, and like a tumble dryer, it goes round and round and round. Startups tries to accumulate resources like a snowball rolling down a hill. It tries to kind of get bigger, right, more solid. And eventually, if it's doing the right thing, it will form some kind of strategy which makes it legitimate. So the reason why David and Microsoft can do what they do is because Microsoft is extremely legitimate. You don't have to, we all know what the word Microsoft means. If I'm a large company and I buy from Microsoft, my boss is not going to fire me, all right? If my boss buys from you guys, you might not be there in 6 weeks' time. That's what they think. So product market fit is something that emerges from strategy here. And I'm going to make a massive oversimplification at this time. And I'm going to say that marketing is what makes sales possible. Marketing is what creates a confluence of demand and supply, which makes it possible to do all the absolutely fantastic things that David told you about. And if you've got to the point where you can repeatably, scalably sell the same thing again and again and again to many people, then you've got the beginning of a scale-up business. And my advice to you is be a startup for as short a time as you possibly can, right? Has anyone here got kids? Can I have your hands remain hanging? Did you enjoy the first 2 years of having a child? No, okay, I'm saying particularly. You did enjoy it, okay. Okay, do you have a maid? Do you have a maid? You don't. Okay. Okay. So well, I'm really admiring of you as a father. That's wonderful. I did not enjoy the first 2-3 years of my child's life. Young toddlers are incredibly demanding. They poop all over the floor. They're incredibly random, right? Very stressful. You don't get any sleep. Yeah. And sometimes it's like a 95th centile poop, and you think, oh my God, how much is so much poop come out of? Right. Okay. There you are. Ask him if you think he's starting a family. So running a startup is a bit like bringing up a toddler, right? It's a messy, frustrating business. It's wonderful, but that's what you're doing, right? My advice is get to the scale up stage where you can start having things a bit more predictable. And I think nobody says it better than Professor Steve Blank. Has anyone come across him? So he's one of the originators of the lean startup concept, which is only one approach to building startups. He teaches at Stanford. He's a practitioner. And I think this is an excellent definition of a startup. It's a temporary organization. It's not what you're going to do forever, right? Microsoft did not start off as what it is today. Microsoft started off with a couple of guys coding a version of BASIC for the Altair 8800, right, which was a microprocessor that didn't last for more than 2 or 3 years, right? Microsoft began just like you guys. It's a temporary organization. It's evolved many times. And one of the impressive things about Microsoft is that though it's so mature, many mature companies eventually eclipse and kind of burn out into a sunset. But under the current management of Microsoft, it's kind of been reinvented and it's still incredibly successful. And we have our representative Microsoft who'd like to chip in at this point. So I will hand him the microphone.
Actually, I really like the point that you're making, because there's a very good slide that shows the top 10 largest company by valuation every single decade. I think they started doing this since like 1970s. It goes all the way up into the 2020s, right? You can see that almost every single decade, the ranking in the top 10 transitions in most of the time. I think the last 10, 20 years, I think 60, 70% of the companies remain, but it's an exception. But the other interesting thing is, in the last decade or the last 2 decades, most of the companies that are in the top 10 largest company in the world ranking, they're actually less than 30 years old. So 100% agree.
Thank you, David.
They were startups.
In fact, you're absolutely right. I wish I'd brought the graph with me. What the data shows is back in the 1960s, the S&P 500, the big stock market in the US, was dominated by companies that were 50 or 60 years old. Companies like General Electric, Sara Lee, Kraft, Exxon, enormous businesses, right? The average time that a company now spends in the S&P 500 is about 15 to 18 years. So the stats show, on David's point, that 40 to 50% of the brand name companies that we know today will not be brand name companies in 10 years' time. Think about that. Google may not be up there. Apple may not be up there. Facebook may not be up there. Now, one of the theories about why that is the case is because as they grow, large companies lose the agility and they lose the ability to do what startups do. As one large company owner said to me, driving a corporation is like driving an oil supertanker. You know, it takes you 20 miles to change direction because you're charging ahead. What you need is speedboats alongside you to go and look at interesting opportunities. And from a corporate's point of view, startups are like the speedboats that go and investigate treasure islands as the oil tanker is plowing ahead. Okay. So that's how large companies view you. Anyway, as a startup, your objective is to stop being a startup. Right? That's the number one priority. Okay, so how do you do that? Again, David kind of alluded to this in his talk. There are really a couple of approaches. The approach, if you're a large established organization, is typically you identify a problem, you have a vision of what you want to do, and you plan your way to do it. And because you're trusted by the marketplace and because you have lots of resources, you can be fairly sure that you're going to get that right. So the kind of model of innovation that 1950s companies went through was typically like this. You have a bunch of mad engineers sitting somewhere in a research facility in the middle of a field, right, doing weird stuff. and then a bunch of people with suits turn up and using their brilliant intuition pick the best ideas. Then you hire a bunch of engineers to turn them into actual products you can sell. And finally, you hire a bunch of salespeople like David to go and sell them to your clients. Right? And this worked extremely well for automobiles, refrigerators, TV, radio, all that stuff. Right? This isn't a bad model of innovation. I don't know about you, but I'd rather my drugs were invested this way. I want people to test lots of crazy, dangerous chemicals, and then using their intelligence to select the best ones, make sure they're safe, and finally, when I know them, I'll put them on my body. I don't want to do what startups do, which is just to launch some random crap, right? Dump it on the marketplace, see what happens, and learn from it as quickly as possible. A plastic surgeon once said to me, you startups are great, but I can't do like version 1.0 of my new surgery on your face and then say, I'm sorry it didn't work out. Tell you what, I'll give you 10% off version 2.0 next year. How would that be? I'll give you a coupon. Right? You can't do that with surgery. You can't do it with financial services either, because financial services are all based on trust. That's the market you're in, the market for trust. If you blow someone's trust, you've lost it forever. Right? So startups typically optimize for learning, speed of learning, not for a surefire, steady process. That's a whole discussion in itself. So if you are going with a kind of corporate approach, and this is the approach that many people have, particularly engineers tend to have this view, out there are kind of keyholes waiting to be kind of tapped, opportunities, right? And if I'm clever enough to engineer the right key, I could just like unlock the lock or crack the combination, and then all the money would come flying out. Right? So there is a view that opportunities, the thing you need to find as you approach product market fit, that they're out there waiting to be discovered. Now, again, as David said, that is sometimes true. If you are a large, established, well-known brand with lots of history, you can engineer your way to success. Every time a McDonald's franchise opens, it opens based on a lot of research and a lot of existing knowledge about what it takes to make a successful franchise. They need to know how many people are walking past. They need to know how much are the staff going to be paid. They need to know how am I going to supply the fresh goods every day. All these sorts of things. Yeah, there's a checklist, just like you saw the kind of checklists that David was using. Right? You can do that when you're a grown-up business. So the process, if you believe that markets are out there waiting to be discovered, this is your strategy. You go out and map your landscape in as much detail as you possibly can. You try and identify the opportunity in it. You try and create features that will give people what they want, right? And this is old-fashioned. If you do any MBA, you'll come across some variation of this. It's called the 4 Ps of marketing, right? Product, place, price, promotion. So get the right product available to people in the right place at the right price, and let them know that it's there, and they'll come and buy it. Build it, and they will come. Except it doesn't work. So what do you do if you're a startup? A startup is more like the landscape you're looking at is not a neat map. It's not like this, where you can just go to Google Maps and download loads of data and it's already mapped out for you. A startup is like this. It's like climbing up a hill, trying to find somewhere to camp for the night just to survive, trying to find a niche where you can begin to put your roots down. And all around you is fog. You can't see where you're going. So the lean startup approach and design thinking and all those kinds of things are much more based on a process of iteration and discovery and testing. And that's why many startups optimize for learning rather than for the kind of corporate style innovation process. Has anyone ever seen this picture before? It's called the design double diamond. I won't go into it in detail, but it's one approach to looking at thinking of businesses as starting a business as being a design process. Most of us begin our journey to start a company thinking, oh, I've got an idea. I want to do my idea, right? And most people think they're here and they want to develop their idea because that's comfortable. I like writing code. I like designing interiors for my new shopping mall, right? And then nobody cares at the end of it. And the reason why nobody cares is because they were solving the wrong problem. That's why you saw that statistic, building something that the market doesn't want. So the design approach to getting a startup to product market fit says, before we start developing a product, before we start developing a solution, we need to understand a problem. So if you only remember one thing from today, this is what I'm about to say, right? Fall in love with a problem, don't fall in love with your solution, right? Fall in love with a customer's problem. If you do that and you keep working at solving the right kind of customer's problem, you will build a successful business. If you fall in love with your own solution, you'll run out of money before anyone cares. So I don't have time to go into these. I mean, normally I teach these things. I teach design thinking on typically 4 days intensive, all day long course. I've taught Lean Startup over 13 weeks as an interactive accelerator project. I can't go into those things in depth. I just can't teach you that stuff. But the good news is, compared to 10 years ago, there are thousands upon thousands of YouTube videos, books that you can read all about these things, right? My suggestion is that you do your homework and read some of those books. And then I gather that you have access to mentoring on this program. Once you've got some of the language and some of the ideas, then talk about where you think you're at with a mentor. But do the homework first, because there isn't any shortcut to it, right? It's like learning a language. Until you've learned some basic vocabulary, you can't start speaking the language, right? Now, these aren't the only methods. You'll find that there's a load of buzzwords out there. And this picture really made me laugh, because it's kind of some techie's idea of the 50 most interesting buzzword things that I heard in the last week, and I put them all together on this amazing diagram that just shows a formula of success in startups. Beware of those kinds of people. You often meet them at startup events. They're typically independent consultants of some kind. They've usually got a technical background, and or they're a consultant that's trying to sell you consulting services, and they'll kind of sell you on all of these things, growth hacking, blah, 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 right? It's not all wrong, but many of it is not appropriate to you now. And they probably aren't an expert in any of those things, right? So just be aware. Same with blog posts. If you read lots of bloggers are in the business of getting eyeballs to sell you their books. They're not in the business of helping you succeed, right? So where do you start? What I suggest that you begin with is viability. Is anyone here familiar with the business model canvas? Can I have a show of hands? Okay, so for those who are in the room, I said there's about a third to a half that maybe are familiar. Apologies for the next 5 minutes. We just have to do a quick dive into the business model canvas. So imagine that you could, instead of trying to understand the whole complexity of your business all at once, imagine you could sort of fold it out flat and debug it section by section, look at it section by section. It'd be like unfolding a pizza box. Everything in this box has a different function, right? This is the lid. Its job is to close the box. This is the base. Its job is to hold the pizza or whatever's inside. These are the sides, which stop it dropping out. And these flaps here stop the whole box falling apart. So each of the sides of the box has a function, but they join up together, and together they make the box. And most technologies are like that, and most companies are like that too. And this is a model put together by a guy called Alex Osterwalder. It was his PhD project in 2004, called the Business Model Canvas. And it's a way of understanding businesses. So I'm going to ask at this moment if we could try running, could we click on that video to see if it runs? Hopefully there will be sound with it. We need to hear the sound. So we music. And, oh, here it's coming. We'll probably get an advert for lawnmowers or something now. Here it comes. Oh, we've got 3 versions of it now. Thank you very much, Hugh. So, is that familiar to some people, I guess, right? The reason why this is so helpful, as I say, is that it starts to allow you to focus in on what am I trying to do with my business right now? Because the thing that the only thing you're really short of right now as startups is time, right? If you had more money, all that would do is give you more time, right? Maybe you could accelerate what you're doing faster. But at the moment, there is a period at which you run out of money, at which your spouse says to you, go and get a job, right? At which your family says, what is all this entrepreneurship crap? Go back to working for the IRS or whatever, right? So time is the one thing you're short of, and the business model canvas is a way to focus your time towards achieving product market fit. And as the video said also, it's a good way to discuss with people like me. If I'm coming into your business, I don't have a business model canvas, I can't see what you're trying to do. Now, one warning, which I won't go into today, is that there is a certain type of business called a multi-sided market or a platform business, which won't work with the business model canvas. You have to use a different kind of canvas for that, but that's a totally different conversation. So let me stick with the majority of businesses which do work like this. Here's a really simple example. It's a lemonade booth selling homemade lemonade in the middle of a park. Okay? So the only people it sells to are park visitors. It doesn't sell by mail order. It doesn't sell to large companies ordering something for a day out from the office, right? It's selling to people who are there in the park right now. That's the customer base. Why do they buy it? It's not just that they're thirsty, it's that they get a good experience of having a homemade refreshing drink. How does that refreshing drink and that value get delivered to them? Well, it's sold through a booth. And maybe also they learn about it, if they're really interested in it, they learn about it by going to a website as well. But this is not an e-commerce business. It's fundamentally sold through a booth. Why do they keep going back? Because they fancy the girl behind the desk, because they enjoy the experience of the lemonade, they enjoy the relationship they have with the person. It's part of their park experience. So the customer relationship is a very personal one. That would be different if you were buying a SaaS product from Microsoft. You have a very professional relationship, it's transactional, there is a service level agreement, right? So everything on this side of the diagram here is about what the customer experiences of you, from you, right? On the left-hand side, it's what's behind the scenes to actually make that happen. So there are some things that the company must have. It's got to have stuff to make lemonade, it's got to have salespeople to sell it, and it's got to have a booth. Without that, you're not in business, right? Those are essential things that you've got to own. But in addition to that, you need to have permission to operate in the park. And typically, most parks are owned by town councils and people like that. So you're going to have some partners who are park owners. And then the things you do yourself, you actually make the lemonade and you market it. You make sure it's sweet enough, what the customer wants. And then you have to actually sell it yourself. Now, you could outsource some of that. You could say, well, I'm not going to make the lemonade. I'm going to sell gourmet artisanal lemonades made by 15 different kinds of people around my city, right? That would be a different business. The proposition then would not be see the natural lemonade being made in front of your eyes, drink it and enjoy it. It would be a different proposition, different kind of value proposition, but it could still be cold and tasty and natural. It might be a lemonade bar that specializes in fruit drinks, right? So those are all the things that go into making that business work. Is anyone uncomfortable with that? You can see how it works. I recommend putting something like that together for your business. And the critical thing you need to ask yourself is, well, if this is how I create value, ultimately the way I capture value is by charging more money than it costs me to run the business. Right? I've got to be sustainable. Even if you're a social enterprise, an impact business, you may not want to call it profit, but you do need to make a surplus, right? Otherwise, you'll go out of business. So how do you get to that point? I've put numbers on this business model canvas because this is the way that I recommend people go about trying to get to product market fit. First of all, number one, be clear about what value are you creating for who? Do they really want it? Is it what they want? Right? How am I going to reach those people? And what are they going to want from me? How can I do this sustainably? So, for example, if you're launching fintech products, I can't remember who you sell to. Who are your customers? So is it banks? Every kind of, okay. So somehow or other, you've got to get through the door of those banks. So you've got to have some mechanism. So the channel might be to do small focus discussion groups where you bring together 8 or 10 people from banks and have a discussion around a table, or you might speak at a conference. But you've got to say something surprising and new, otherwise, right, why would they care? And then once you provided that service, is it software as a service? It's SaaS? So they get to see some kind of consultancy person once in a while. So this is a software as a service product, but with a human face. Okay, thank you. So let's just look at the first stages of the, you can see this is the order. I won't go through them all, but you get the idea. So this is the one where most people fall down. Is actually, who am I trying to sell to first? Because you need to start making some revenue. Most investors, people get obsessed on a program like this about, well, how do I contact investors? How do I get investors to invest? Investment is not success. Investment just means you gave away a load of your shares to a rich person, right? You don't own the company anymore. Now you've got to explain to that investor what you're doing, right? Investment is not success. It's not an end. It might be a valuable tool, but it might not be. Right? But the first question an investor will typically ask you is, tell me about your revenue. They want to know, has a real customer actually paid you money when they had a choice to buy something else? So the very first thing you need to do is to find real customers. And just like if you remember with Bill Gates and Microsoft, those don't have to be the customers that you stick with forever, but you've got to start somewhere, right, to prove that you're for real. That's the very first step towards legitimacy. A business that does not earn revenue is not legitimate. A business that's not making a profit yet, that's okay, so long as there's a pathway to profitability that's plausible, but you need to have revenue. Otherwise, it's just you talking. So if you're trying to figure out who are your customers, do you remember we did this last time in our communication strategy? And the thing I said to you was, go out and test this on people. Does this make sense to people? In particular, does it make sense to the customers you're trying to approach? If you just get blank stares from banks when you go to them with your business and they're not interested to go past the first time you open your mouth, then it's not right yet. Okay. So your first way of probing the market doesn't involve building a prototype, doesn't involve anything other than telling a story. Now at this point, what time are we at now? Are we 48? So we're 12 minutes left. Thank you. So I can dive into that with some examples. Thank you very much. Later on. The really critical thing I'd say, earlier on I asked you what market you're in, and you all gave me massive markets that you're in, right? You need to be much, much more focused, right? Much, much, much more focused. So it needs to be mature banks in Singapore that have mainly retail clients. It needs to be, I don't know, whatever it is for you guys, right? We don't have time to go through this today, but I strongly recommend going through this exercise, thinking, who are the markets that we could specifically approach? And remember, you don't sell to a market. You don't sell to companies. You sell to people, always. It's people that say yes or no. So who are the people you're trying to reach? Sales managers inside shoe manufacturers, right? Those kinds of people. So who are the people we're trying to get to? And then ask yourself these 4 questions. Have they got any money right now allocated to solving the problem that you've got? If you have to educate them that they've got a problem that they don't even know about yet, and they have to go to their boss and they have to say to their boss, hey boss, we should allocate some money towards this next year, you're going to be out of business before they do business with you, right? So they've got to have money allocated to something right now. It might not be allocated exactly to you, but it needs to be something close enough to you that a middle manager can say, oh, actually, I'll divert this money into these guys' pockets. They've got to have an urgent burning need, right? They've probably tried to solve this problem that you're solving for them already and failed. If there's no urgency, they're not going to do business with you. Can't be a nice to have, oh, it'd be kind of good to do this. It's got to be a real pain in the ass problem. Give you an example. We invested in one of our most successful investments at the start of Accelerator. I started a company called Silent 8. Initially, they launched a cross-platform search engine. So basically it was like Google for companies. They've all got data splattered around different databases around the company. It allowed people inside an organization to find buried knowledge. Meh, that's kind of nice, cute, right? Their idea was that they would sell $20 a seat kind of licenses to large corporations. People weren't that interested. When they laser focused on one urgent problem, which was for bankers, lawyers, and other professionals, know your customer. When I get a new customer in, I have to find out, is this person a money launderer or not, right? And by focusing on that and reducing the time to do KYC from 3 hours down to 30 seconds, suddenly that transformed the process. If I get someone dodgy wandering into my bank and they say they're a billionaire, and I look at them and I think, well, is he a billionaire? Is he an arms dealer? What is he? I get them to go through KYC while they're sitting in front of me. The computer does it while I'm chatting with them, and without even having the awkward conversation about, will you hand over to me all of your passports and blah, 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 I can immediately know whether they're safe to do business with 80% of the time. 20% of the time, I do need more information, but 80% of the time, I can say yes straight away. So that company, Silent 8, focused on a really urgent problem that financial institutions faced, and that's when they started taking off. And they do it by offering a world-class solution. And again, this is where this point about focus comes in. If you try and address everybody's needs, you're not going to do it because everyone wants something slightly different. What you need to find is something where you can repeatedly do the same thing again and again and again. Did you hear what David said? He said, sometimes, very occasionally, we will customize a product for a client. Right? If Microsoft did that with every client, think about how many clients Microsoft's got. If people sort of said, oh, actually, I kind of like Word, but can you change the color over here? Or can you make the typeface slightly bigger? Or blah, 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 they'd go out of business. So what they found is something that most people want most of the time. Right? You need something that's brilliant for enough people consistently that you don't have to run a bespoke consultancy. Right? And finally, this is really critical, will they talk to you? Can you get through to them? Can you identify who are the decision makers to do all that stuff that David called qualification? Because if you can't reach people, even if they've got money and an urgent need, and you can offer them something brilliant, you're not gonna have any success. Yeah. So you might not pick the most profitable market to start with. You might not pick the market that shows off your technology in the most spectacular way with all its bells and whistles. But you might pick the one that gets you money quickest and gets you going. Now, of course, it's got to be desired by people. How do you get that right? Has anyone come across this concept called jobs to be done? Again, this is a whole 3-day course, but there's a whole load of stuff about it online. The concept of jobs to be done is that when someone buys something from a business, whether they're an individual or a company, they're trying to solve some problem. So I once horrified Bosch, who I have a long relationship with, Bosch, the big company, and I said to them, no one wants your power drills. Absolutely nobody wants your power drills. You don't. You want a hole in the wall, reliable hole in the wall, right? You don't want a power drill. In fact, you don't want a hole in the wall. You want to hang up a picture. Or actually, what you really want to do is to give my wife a surprise when she comes home and there's a lovely picture on the wall for her birthday. Do you see what I'm getting at? The actual job to be done is what you need to understand. There isn't time to go into huge detail, but it's such a lovely example. I'll spend a couple of minutes describing it. One of the classic examples of job to be done is there was a real estate, it's a true story, real estate developer in America was developing retirement homes. It's very common for Americans to have a large home when they've got a family and then to sell off the family home and downsize to a small retirement home, maybe a condominium apartment as they get older. This developer had built lots of condominium apartments, and they got this problem. Buyers would get 70% through the way through doing a sale, and then they'd pull out. And the company was thinking, well, what do we do wrong? What would you do in that situation? So imagine you've got these apartments to sell, then people are pulling out consistently 70% of the time. What would you do? Die? Okay. Find out why. Yes, exactly. So what companies would typically do is they discount the price. They would try offering free kitchen appliances. They would try offering free tiles, paint, all the kinds of crap that you get from real estate people, right? None of that worked. It was only when they truly understood why people weren't buying, they found that when people retire, they face this huge problem of getting rid of all of the stuff that they've accumulated over life. And there is one item that American women find it extremely hard to get rid of, and that is the dining room table. Because the dining room table is where my daughter drew her first picture. It's where we ate our last meal with my father before he died, right? It's charged with everything about their sense of achievement in their lives. And the average American dining room table was too large to fit into the space allocated for it in this apartment. Another example, McDonald's, this is getting true, McDonald's was trying to sell milkshakes in America, right? Trying to sell more of them. So what do? Do you discount the price, but then you're losing profit? Do you change flavors? Didn't really work. Do you change the portion size? Didn't really work. It was only when they truly understood why were people buying milkshakes, they realized there were two peaks during the day when people bought milkshakes. There was a huge peak between 7 in the morning and 9 in the morning. And that was American commuters getting into their cars, overweight, chubby uncles like me, thinking, I know, I'll have a healthy snack, a choco latte milkshake, right? And I will put it in my car, in those drink holder things that you get in all American cars, right? And when I'm sat there on an 8-lane highway, bored in the traffic, I'll suck this thing, and it takes a long time to suck it through the little thin straw. And that will give me something to do while I'm going to work, and then it will fill me up, and hopefully I won't snack in the morning, and then I won't be fat, right? So that was what people were trying, that was the job people were trying to do, to get themselves occupied doing something during the morning on the commute. In the afternoon, there was a massive burst between 3 and sort of 4:30. And that turned out to be soccer moms picking up their kids from school. Immediately, they pick up the kids from school. The kids go, Mummy, 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 blah, 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 blah. And Mum's head's exploding, and she's thinking, oh my God. Oh. So she's torn between two things, which is I want to be with my children, but I'm really tired because I've been working all day. I know I'll take them for a healthy milkshake, and that will shut them up, right? Because it's got this thin straw, and it'll take the kids ages to drink the milkshake. So soccer moms giving their kids a healthy treat that shut them up for half an hour, so mum got some quiet time, right? That was why they were buying them, right? So everything that gets bought and sold for complex reasons. Sure, there's a functional aspect of it. The milkshake's got to be safe. The apartment must not fall down. It's got to have a certain number of bedrooms. But that's not the real reason why. I hate to keep focusing on, the fintech business at the back, but there's an emotional reason why someone in a bank is going to buy that, because I'm going to be impressing my boss that I brought in something that solves a problem that they've been complaining about, and I'm the hero that brings this through the door, right? Or I'm really fearful that the MAS, the compliance people, are going to come and crap on us unless we do this. So we need to be seen to be doing this stuff preemptively, right? Even if it's not an actual functional problem yet, it's a cheap way of showing MAS that we're kind of doing something about cybersecurity or whatever. So wherever you're selling, there's always an emotional aspect to it as well as the functional aspect of it, right? And one of the ways to try and understand that is to try and understand from your customers, when they're trying to do something, what is the situation exactly? So when I am trying to clean my frying pan in the morning after I've cooked bacon and eggs, right? I struggle to do that without damaging the non-slip surface on the frying pan. What I want to do is to avoid my wife shouting at me because I've ruined the frying pan, but she'll also shout at me if I haven't got the frying pan clean. So I need some way of cleaning the frying pan that doesn't scratch the surface and at the same time gets it clean. That's my problem. So this is called a job story. Right? And if you can put that together for your company, that's for your, whatever you're trying to do, that's really helpful. So once you've done all that, if you've understood the customer, then you need to ask yourself, is that actually the value proposition that the customer wants? And do they have money? Do they have urgency? All those other things. Now you can see why it's hard. Because it's not just about the customer. Once you figure that out for the customer, you've also got to figure it out for your partners and your staff and everybody else. Do you remember all those other stakeholders we talked about in the communications thing? They've all got to be desirable. It's got to be desirable to them as well. If you create a wonderful product which customers love, but it destroys the environment, a government agency is going to come and poop on you, right? If you've done something which requires your staff to work, all day and all night, it's not sustainable. So this is why finding product market fit is hard. It's a bit like being a politician. You're trying to find the art of the possible, what's possible in the bit between all these people, yeah? So that's why I personally would say that for a startup, it's less about having a vision and doing analysis, and it's more about a design process, and it's about discovering, testing out lots of things. So that's why I would advocate something like product design thinking or lean startup. Now, just a warning, if you go out there and you start Googling product market fit, you'll find lots and lots of confusion, and you'll find lots of people talking about their specific situation that's not necessarily the same as yours. So just to be aware of that. Okay. This is something which is very current. People talk about it a lot, and it's good that they're talking about it, but we're not there on a clear definition of it yet. Where I think many people would agree is that the journey for a startup is something like this. Has anyone ever seen this before? This is called the startup curve. I can't remember who originally came up with it, but the idea is if this is happy and this is sad, when you start a startup, everyone's incredibly excited. We're all going to be billionaires. We're going to change the world. It's going to be fabulous. And then, oh, God, that's hard. And then we think we found a solution, but no, we haven't. And then actually, my best friend who joined me to start the company wants to go back and work in consulting because their husband's complaining to them that, you know, there's no money coming in. And then we think we made a sale, and then they pull out or they don't pay us the invoice, right? And then actually they want us to customize the whole thing. And it's a slog. And eventually you get to the point when things start working. I'm seeing some smiles around the room because everyone's been through this, right? So the typical time scale here, so again, you don't beat yourself up, is for a software startup, which is often the easiest kind of thing to start because it's all intangible. This is probably between 12 and 24 months, right? Probably, most of the time. For a medical technology company, it might be 10 years. So this is called the trough of sorrow, the middle bit. Support each other, be kind to each other, find people like the peers on this team who can help you get through it, find mentors who can support you, and good luck. That's the end of my talk.